for it.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Neverlag. We told you we'd be back in May, about April. That's what we're doing. We're here in May, about April. We're going to go through our this month in gaming and talk about everything that we played in April and probably some other things. So welcome back to the podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Levi, joined by the man who fell in the pit, Zach. Zach, do you remember April?
For me, April was a blur of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So not really. Not really. I finally crawled out of that hole. I have things to talk about. And it's good to be here in May talking about April, just like just as was prophesied.
Just as was foretold.
Yeah.
As foretold. Yeah, April, man. We're already a bit into May. We're a little late getting to this, but we're gonna dig into the recesses of our memory and try and remember everything we did in April. And for Zach, it's gonna be a repeat of March of all the same stuff.
I did finish. Like in March, I was still in the earlier part of
That's
a
true.
massive game, and I've now finished it, and so I can give some non-spoiler thoughts on the overall experience. And I think this game, it's a beloved game at this point, but it is also a little bit divisive with the ending, and so obviously I'm not going to spoil anything.
Oh, interesting.
But I can give some high level like feelings of like how without spoiling anything. I can kind of, and it's hot off the press because I was up till 6 a.m. last night beating Final Fantasy VII Rebirth for you viewers. This was for you, not for me.
For you. I don't know if you could say 6 a.m. last night.
Yeah, a couple hours ago I finished.
So I mean, what do you have? 2 hours of sleep, 3 hours, 4 hours?
Yeah, my days were separated by a small nap in the morning light. So
yikes.
Here we are.
All right, this should be peak conversation then. So man, where do we start then? I want to do a quick mention of Bad Batch again, because we finished or we're about to finish season 2.
Mm-hmm.
And we've just been kind of tidbits here and there. We haven't been rushing through it.
Yeah. How is it? Is it worth it? I haven't watched any.
It's so good, man. I'm just like thoroughly enjoying it, and I'm really glad that I went back to it after my I talked about this last month. My initial impressions years ago. I don't remember when it came out, but season 1, I was just kind of like, I'm not feeling it. I was never too big on Clone Wars. I had seen some of the highlight episodes about the Bad Batch from Clone Wars, but for some reason it didn't click with me. And then we restarted it at the beginning of, I feel like we restarted at the beginning of April. So I don't know how we would have. Oh yeah, we would have talked about it because we were talking about March and April.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned that you were starting it. Yeah.
So we're about to finish season 2, and it's just been like super good. The writing, the plot development is just, every episode is very, very well constructed and well written. And I think that's really the best thing you can say about any show. And it kind of creates this sense of constant quality where, like, from episode to episode, you can, regardless of what they're kind of one-offs, a lot of them.
Yeah.
And regardless of what's happening, it's going to be a good time for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's honestly the best Star Wars that we've gotten in the modern era. Any of the shows that we've gotten. And then, there's a couple of the movies I think I liked. I don't know. There's a couple movies that are close, but like, this is just really good Star Wars content, which is kind of rare at this point.
Is it better than the Jabba the Hutt prequel spinoff? Because that one was pretty good.
Prequel? Is that a real thing?
No, I made that up.
But
you thought it might be true, which says everything.
I know, it's so diluted at this point. So anyways, I just wanted to shout that out real quick, because that is not a game, but there might be one or two other things worth mentioning. But yeah, Bad Batch continues to be great. I don't know if there's 3 or 4 seasons. I know it's wrapping up.
Yeah.
So I hope it continues all the way through. It's been super good.
Cool. Well, now that I have like this humongous void in my life where Final Fantasy VII Rebirth used to be, maybe I'll check it out.
Yeah, now you can get to the billions of things that have accumulated in the time since you started.
Yeah, now thankfully I can actually Rebirth. Catch up on my backlog of everything.
Yeah, that'll totally happen.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got a couple for April.
Yeah,
Do you
go
have
ahead.
one? You see, you told me you
I
had
have
a
a couple.
secret.
No, I have a
You have a
couple.
couple.
Hmm.
Where do you want to start? You're in
You
the
kick it
driver's
off.
seat.
You kick it off. We'll
Okay.
save Rebirth till last, maybe.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's see here. Let me kick it off with some boring standbys that we've had for the whole year. Helldivers 2 continued to play, especially for the first half of April. Continues to just be a super fun game. I have taken a break the last probably 2 weeks or so. There's been a whole lot of drama about Helldivers 2. I don't know if you've heard any of it, but
A little bit.
Sony Sony did their best to cause catastrophic mayhem in the Helldivers community because they were requiring um, PC players on Steam to connect to PSN in order to play Helldivers 2. And it turns out that there's only like 30 countries that you can legally sign up for a PlayStation account in, and like 170 that you cannot. And so you
Wow.
have to technically falsify your
Yeah.
location in order to set up a PSN, which is hilarious because as Sony gets further and further into um, this PC market. They clearly want more of their games on PC. Helldivers 2 has been one of their top grossing
Yeah.
games like ever. Um and you know, the majority of that is on PC. So it's just hilarious that in this push that Sony has, most of the world can't set up a PlayStation account. And so it's like, all right, we got to get this figured out. But anyways, there's all kinds of blowback and the community was enraged, outraged, and they walked it back, so that's not a thing. But there's been all kinds of drama. I will say there's also drama within just the game itself. The devs continue to balance the game in a way that feels very tone deaf. um, you know, we've
It
talked
seems
about
like
it, we
these
talked
live
about it when it came
service
out.
Yeah, it seems like these live service game developers just cannot figure this out. Like it seems like time and again
Yeah,
it's the age old thing. It's I don't know. Just as
and this one
power
is
corrupts,
especially
live
bizarre
services.
because it's not a PvP game. It's
Yeah.
a cooperative game, and it just feels like anytime something is fun or usable, um, it gets nerfed, and then new stuff comes out, and it's just not very good. The I believe the director or CEO, or I don't know who he is, actually did finally come out and say that they're going to look at the way they're balancing the game, because it. I think he even said something to the effect of, it seems like when something is fun, it gets taken away or whatever. We don't want that to be the idea. So we'll see if it changes. I mean, literally, it's been 2 to 3 since it came out. They've been doing this, and it hasn't ruined the game. It's still fun, but it really is just annoying. It's just so annoying when it's like you
Yeah.
really find something. Oh, I'm really liking using this loadout, and then a patch comes out, makes it all worse, and doesn't really replace it with anything good. Um,
Especially
it's just kind
annoying
of
too.
draining. It just drains
Yeah.
enthusiasm, really.
And it's especially annoying, like you said, because this isn't PvP. So it's like it, and Helldivers was built on this whole concept of like we're just bringing the fun back to video games. Like this is a $40 title. It's it doesn't have a bunch of excess stuff. It is just the experience, and it's fun. It's like a satire of Starship Troopers and some of these other things, and um, so it just feels weird that they're falling into the same problem of, oh, we got to balance this game appropriately. Like this used to be really frustrating back when we played Destiny, but at least with Destiny it was like, well, they're trying to make PvP work a certain way, and whether or not that fit for how a lot of Destiny gamers wanted it, at least it was like I kind of understood that there was this other thing they were trying to do. Whereas with Helldivers, it's like, what is even the point? Like, why are you shooting yourselves in the foot?
Yeah, it does feel very antithetical to the game that they've made because the reason this game took off, and we've talked about it so much, is it does feel like it's harkening back to the era when the LAN era, where like games were kind of, they were online, but it was the early stages. There wasn't all this fluff and mess about it. It just the game was what it was, and so yeah, I almost think the game would be better off if they released a weapon and it was broken, or
Yeah.
if they released a weapon and it was terrible. Like if it just was what it was, that
Hmm.
would almost make more sense in the scope of what this game is and what it's trying to be, rather than the constant tinkering
Yeah.
that's happening. So, anyways, I don't need to get into it too much. It's just I've taken a little break. Like I said, though, This is a game I'll come back to probably throughout the year because it has such a good core gameplay loop,
Mm-hmm.
um, that it's something you want to pick up probably a couple times a month. So
Yeah.
still been dabbling with it. Sorry about the darkness here for any of you um, watching the video version. It's very dark in here today, even though the lighting is pretty much always the same. Need to get a ring light or something, but it is what it
Live
is.
from the dark, never lag
From the
podcast.
dungeon. Yep.
Yeah, Helldivers is fun. I've played some of it, not nearly as much as you. I've enjoyed it. Um, I'm glad it exists. I'm glad we have a game like that in this day and age. I think it's been successful partly because it's filling a gap in the market that like we all missed having some games like this. So hopefully the tinkering doesn't mess with it too much and whatnot.
Yeah.
But I'm glad it exists. It is a fun time.
Yeah. It definitely is. Um. Okay. So I've got. Let's see. Let me think through April. I've got three more games, three
Okay.
more surprise games for y'all.
Yeah.
Um. What do you have? Do you want to go next, or should I do
Sure.
another one?
I'll go next for one of my
Let's hear it, man.
surprise
What do you got?
games. I started Another Crab's Treasure this
I knew that was one of
past
them.
month. Yeah. Um, it's a new indie title from I'm forgetting the name of the. It's like something to do with crabs or the ocean or something. The studio name I
the
forget what it is.
The studio name is Crab
Isn't
something.
okay? I gotta look this up real quick. Um, it was like
It's their
tangential.
first game. I know that.
Yeah. It is Aggro Crab. Yeah. So there we
Aggro
go.
Crab, really? That's
Yeah.
hilarious. They were really
Yeah.
doubling. Maybe they're gonna make a crab multiverse.
Maybe that's
You
just
know,
that's what they're here for. So yeah, I started Another
their
Crab's
next game is gonna
Treasure.
be Crabborn.
Right. Yeah, I mean that would be the sensible Elden Crab, right?
Elden Crab. I like that.
I mean, yeah. Um, so Another Crab's Treasure is basically like a semi cute underwater platformer that harkens back to like N64 PS2 era in some ways, but then is also very much like a Dark Souls game in combat. Like the combat feels very much like Souls, where you have um, a guard, you have a dodge, you have a tighter hit window. Um, Enemies are challenging.
Parrying,
Like
right?
pair. So far, I'm only like an hour and a half in, and I don't have a parry per se.
Oh, really?
So I don't know if that's something that's unlocked a little bit later. So you have like a guard where you're a little hermit crab who loses his shell at the beginning of the game, and you have to like you're going on a quest to try and get it back essentially. But along the way, you get other items as your shell, like a soda can or a banana peel or whatever else. And so you can hide in your shell and you take less damage. It's the equivalent of like guarding in Dark Souls or some of
Like
these other
holding up
games,
a shield.
like holding up your shield or blocking with your blade. Doesn't remove all damage, but it puts more on. And your shell has its own like health bar, and you're like so you have a shell health bar and your own health bar. Um, so it's a little different. It's not exactly one to one Dark Souls, but it's mostly similar. Like at least in the earlier games, as to where I'm at, it relies a lot on like dodging and getting the timing right for dodging the right attacks or running away from them. Making sure you dodge and like not just dodging, but also dodging in the right direction. Like certain attacks, like if you don't do it the right way, you kind of have to learn like. For bosses especially, like they have certain moves where you're like, okay, I need to dodge to the left or to the right, otherwise he's going to get me with this lobster's going to get me with his claw and hit me with a massive blow. Um so it's really fun. It's kind of an interesting like um not clash, it works, but it's kind of an interesting like tonal thing of a cutesy platformer with this like pretty rigorous combat system, and the combat feels pretty good. It's the timing feels good. It works. The first boss, like I was hard. It was a skill check for sure. Like the game starts and it's kind of cute, and you fight some enemies, and I think the first time I died, I got surrounded by 3 or 4 enemies, and they overwhelmed me pretty quickly. And it felt kind of like in Bloodborne when I first went into the streets of Yharnam, and I'm like, I got this. I've killed a couple people. I can do this. And then you walk into a mob and you get just eviscerated. And
Yeah.
a similar thing happened to me this, but then I kind of was getting a feel for it, and then I got to the first boss, and I spent like 25 minutes, on this first boss again
Really.
and again, just making sure I understood the attacks, and I had to kind of get good, which was fun. Like the first boss left me feeling it gave me that feeling of satisfaction that um, Souls games give you, where you finish it and you're like, yeah, it's like a rush, and you're kind of elated that you were able to overcome a challenge. Um, so it's cool. I will say, in between like boss fights and some of these other things, it okay, gotta move my cat. I don't know why I let her in here for this. Um, I will say, like, outside of like some of the boss encounters, some of the exploration feels not quite boring, but maybe just a little bit. I'm still earlier on in the game, so this could change. But it's overall my impressions of this game are it's good, not great. But for a first game from a studio, I think the combat's pretty impressive, and they also managed to have some like charming platformer elements that it feels like I'm playing a PS2 game from my early teen years, but
Huh.
also it's Dark Souls. Like it's
Yeah, I mean, it
um,
really looks like they're combining, I mean, SpongeBob with Dark
yeah,
Souls a little
it
bit.
feels
Like,
it feels like you're
really.
in Bikini Bottom
Yeah.
doing Dark Souls combat, and it's got humor too. Like the writing is it's amusing. There are moments that are kind of funny, and it's very like a very silly tone in terms of like the writing and what's happening. And so yeah,
Okay.
it almost does feel like you're in going around Bikini Bottom, but also like
Yeah.
having these uh tense encounters where you're
Huh.
coming out by the skin of your teeth. So
So weird.
um
I'm
anyway,
glad
it's
that you
good.
I'm
Yeah.
glad that you started it to talk about it though, because it's one that I intend to get to this month.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see
I
we'll see if it happens, but it's very much on my like immediate
Yeah,
list of smaller titles I want to play.
I think it's
Um
worth it. I think especially if you like old PS2 platformer type games, and if you like Dark Souls combat systems, like inspired combat systems, then I think you should absolutely check it out. I'm having fun with it. The combat's pretty good. I think you'll like it. Um, it's too early for me to give like a verdict, but it feels worth it. It's also it's like $25 or something. It's not a very expensive game, and it's nice to support an indie studio. So it's good. It's got promise, and I'll be curious to see how I feel as I get later in the game. But also excited to hear what you think about it. I think you've had more Souls like experience than I have in
I
general.
don't know at this
Um,
point. I mean, yeah, maybe, but like
you
you've
definitely
closed the
have,
gap
but
considerably in the last
I have.
year or two.
I've gotten a little good, but yeah,
I've gotten a little good.
another crab's treasure. It's nice. It's about what I expected so far, as I would say. I'm not disappointed, not blown away, but I am enjoying it.
Okay. Well, that's good. Yeah, I had my eyes on that one for a little while. I
Mm-hmm.
think they announced it a couple years ago,
Yeah, I think
maybe
it's
a
two
year
years
or two
ago.
ago. I
Yeah,
don't know. And it was one I definitely had my eyes on. So, and it came out to good reviews. I think they just announced they've sold over 100,000 copies. So,
yeah, good
um,
for them.
I'm glad that you never know with these games. Like when Lies of P was being teased or announced or whatever, it really was just kind of in this sea of wannabe Souls games that always come
Yeah.
out and kind of disappoint. And you never really know, like, are they actually going to be able to do it? And then Lies of P comes out and it's like, wow, how did they do
Hmm.
this? Doesn't sound like they quite hit on that level, obviously, from your first
Yeah,
impressions here, but
yeah,
but you do think you would say the combat feels tight and responsive and fair.
yeah. I would say it does feel fair. It's
Because
hard,
for
but
me,
it feels.
that's the biggest thing with one of these games coming out is if anything feels floaty or the timing doesn't feel like it's fair,
Yeah.
that
No, the
ruins the
I
game.
think the timing feels pretty fair. And like that first boss in particular, it took so long because I would learn one of his move sets, and then I'd get to the halfway point, and he'd introduce another move. And there was one move in particular that I just could not dot, like I could not get away from it. It kept getting me, and it would it would deal like 70% of my health like in damage, and if I was out of heals or whatever, like it was just wrecking me. But then finally I figured out, oh, I need to dodge this other way. Kind of like in Souls, you're like, no, I have to dodge into his legs to the left because that goes under the thing or whatever. And
Right.
in that then gives me a window to get a hit or two in, and then I can get away. And once I like, I went through that process I do in Dark Souls, where once I did that, I was able to beat him, after a couple more tries and getting the hang of all of his different move sets and his tells. So it's pretty good. It's not
One more question that I have as I
yeah.
interview you throughout this process.
Yes.
Um, you said you haven't been introduced to a parry mechanic. I swear there was a parry mechanic in this game, but to this point, is there any sort of rock paper scissors type responses to combat, or is it just roll through everything? Do you have to jump over any, like um, Grime or
Yeah.
Sekiro, some of these other games? Is there a certain move he does where it's like, oh, if you just roll, you're still going to get hit? You got to do something else. Is there anything like
Yeah.
that yet?
Well, I mean, there is a block mechanic where you withdraw into your shell, and so I think they're going for something like that. And different shells have like different levels of toughness. So I think there's more to that. It's possible I was breezing through a tutorial and I missed something with that. But they have like,
You? No way.
yeah, who would think? But um, so it's possible like maybe I ignored an early tutorial thing where it's like block at the exact right moment. I do think if you block at
Actually,
the
you know what
exact
I
right
think it
moment,
is?
it
You know what I
reduces
think it
most of
is?
the damage. But
And this is me I'm just shooting in the dark here, but I'm pretty sure I remember something about if you go into your shell and then you come out at the exact moment the attack hits, that's what a parry is.
yeah, I would
Could be wrong.
imagine actually. I've spent so
Probably
much time
wrong,
just
but
trying to
maybe.
get good with like the basics that I haven't done a lot with that, because that's one thing I've been thinking about is like, how do I when should I be using my shell? Because you can retreat into it. That's clearly a thing. And I do remember something about if you time it perfectly, it mitigates the majority of the damage. So maybe it's something I need to unlock where it's like, you know, in addition to mitigating most of the damage, you can then
Okay.
if do a counter attack. So I feel like there might be something there. But within the first hour and a half or so of playing, it's mostly been um, dodging, but it's been tailored, or like it's been adjusted in a way where it's like you can't just spam dodge necessarily. Like you have to get the timing right. There's a slight cooldown. It's like Dark Souls where if you just keep hitting dodge, your timing it'll get all off and you're going to get hit. And you
Yeah.
also have to make sure you're dodging the right way. And and if you're just dodging away too much, you're not going to be able to get your hits in. So it feels satisfying, but it doesn't feel quite as layered or nuanced as like an actual Souls combat system yet. But again, I think some of those things might be fleshed out a little more as you
Right.
play more.
Is
So
this on Steam Deck?
yeah, I'm playing on Steam Deck, and
Okay.
it's working
Yeah,
working
I
fine.
very much. Oh, cool. I very much plan to get to this, so I will share my thoughts at a future date. And but
Hmm.
has it hooked you? Are you going to finish it?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's done a
Okay.
good job of that. Thinking about Lies of P is just the standout. This is certainly doesn't feel like it's on that level yet. Nor do I think it will be, but it does have its own identity, which is good. Like this, the bikini bottom,
That's what does
you
it. That's
know.
what does it for me. Is we've had so many lookalikes for
Hmm.
Dark Souls at this point, and there's always a place for that medieval fantasy, dark, whatever.
Yeah.
Like if it's done well, great. But it's really nice to get games like this um, that just feel completely different. Even Lies of P, it had
Yeah.
kind of had that dark fantasy vibe to it, but it was a completely different feel from medieval or whatever. So getting
Hmm.
something even more different like this where it feels it's got the
Yeah.
really cartoony
Hmm.
um childlike art style, SpongeBob-esque,
Yeah.
but then you get the Dark Souls combat. I like stuff like that because it's refreshing. Sometimes you want to play a game that has similar mechanics but you want a different palette, and it's nice to have options
Totally.
like that.
Yeah, and
So
I think that's what works well with it. And so, SpongeBob, it feels kind of like a PS2 or an N64 platformer where, like,
yeah,
there's
that's
just the
interesting. i
simplicity.
wasn't i wasn't aware of the platforming situation, which
Little bit.
even
It's
still
not.
could be compared to SpongeBob, because the early
Yeah.
2000s had those SpongeBob platformers that have been remade recently. So
Yeah, so there's a little bit of that, which is just it's simple but satisfying, and that paired with a difficult but rewarding combat system,
right,
it's good. It's worth checking out.
slimy yet satisfying.
Slimy yet satisfying.
Like this podcast.
That's
Um,
right. We're here to slime your ears with
With our
entertainment.
filthy pot. What was it from last month? Or I don't remember
I
what we
don't
were
even.
talking about that was so filthy. Um,
Yeah, it
oh,
was so
palate
bad.
cleansers. The
Right.
opposite of palate cleansers. Slimy yet
Palette
satisfying.
palette sulliers. Yeah.
Palate
Right.
sulliers.
Yeah.
Yeah, that didn't catch on. All right.
No, no, unfortunately. All right,
Well,
what's your
my
next one?
turn. Yeah, my turn. I'm gonna I have to shine a spotlight on a recent indie game as well, which I'm being drawn to more and more. The indie scene is just where it's at this point as the AAA
Yeah.
industry continues to self-sabotage. Quick aside. Have you heard about the whole Xbox shuttering the studio behind Hi-Fi Rush and
Yeah.
just a lot of stuff like that?
What do we do? Like, what
What
are
is
we doing?
happening over there,
Why?
man?
Like, they just spent billions on these studios, and the timing is just weird. Like, it feels like they're just trying to pump their stock prices. And I mean, part of the problem is
I
this
don't know
is
what's happening.
ultimately, I think part is someone who totally understands business and economics in every way. I it seems like, with Microsoft, the problem is we trusted them to be like this cushion where it's like if something's not successful, they're Microsoft. They can afford to support these
Right.
smaller developers. And it's like that's technically true, but I think the if you look at it the other way is that Xbox is not that big of a priority for Microsoft comparative to some of their other divisions. And if it comes, push comes to shove, like Microsoft has a lot of like pressure from shareholders and the public and all these other things to be a certain level of profitable. And um, I think it's a lot more tenable for their executive team to be like, oh yeah, we can make some cuts on the gaming front, no problem. Versus some of these other
Yeah.
things that they're some of their other
I
things
think
that
their
are they're
business
actual cash
model,
cows. But
I think all of these business models are just clearly not working. The exponential growth every year. It's similar to every industry
yeah,
really in capitalism. But yeah, it just feels like their business plan, they've the whole Game Pass thing just isn't doing what they thought it would do. It's reached its saturation point, it feels like, and at this point, it kind of feels like Microsoft is devolving Xbox into like, I think they've even made statements. Well, maybe not so much, but you can infer that it's going to be Call of Duty, it's going to be Fallout and Elder Scrolls. Like they're just gonna
yeah.
they're gonna be it kind of feels like they're going the Ubisoft direction of just pumping out the same three
Ubisoft
games that make the
is a little
money.
bit like Marvel or
Yeah, and they're
Hollywood.
getting rid of the true what we thought Microsoft were doing. We're creating this umbrella for all of these studios to just do what they want, and
Yeah, so that they could
Microsoft
have
would foot the
innovation.
bill so
Yeah,
that they could have such a wide range of different games and things. And then you
yeah,
see them shutter Hi-Fi Rush a year after they were like, other than the mainstays from last year, Hi-Fi Rush was like the only indie game to receive multiple nominations for Game of the Year.
yeah.
Um,
It
so, anyways,
sold pretty well. Like apparently not
it's
well
crazy.
enough, but I it just goes to show that like yeah, I think the business model stuff doesn't make sense. I think
Yeah,
exponential growth is kind of an Ouroboros, snake eating its own tail situation that is a problem.
yeah.
Um, but I
So
think a lot of these,
that's why indie studios are just so
yeah,
where you want to look for the growth of this industry, because something like Another Crab's Treasure, you know, they're gonna see the they're gonna see the benefit from their sales. They get to control their next game.
yeah.
Um,
Well, and it's
yeah,
the way they
they
can
won't get.
stand out too, is they have to make something kind of innovative and creative. Whereas these
Yeah,
larger studios, they can be successful with these massive blockbuster hits. I mean, I think it's a near-sighted thing to be like, we're just going to double down on Call of Duty and Elder Scrolls and Fallout. Like, yeah, those things are going to be massive sellers, but eventually those things get stale. Like we see that with Ubisoft and with Assassin's Creed or some of these other IPs that maybe they're good and people still like them, but you need innovation in the
yeah,
studio to keep it going. And this is feels like a short-sighted thing from Xbox.
and
I would
maybe
guess this is more Microsoft than X. Like it
yeah,
doesn't seem like something
yeah.
Xbox wants to be doing, but here we are.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows who's actually pulling the strings there? But and maybe it's successful. Call of Duty's been successful for as long as video games have been made, almost at this point. So maybe
Yeah,
it's successful business wise. I don't really care. What matters to me is it's not for me. Games
Yeah.
like, ironically, I didn't play Hi-Fi Rush. I didn't really enjoy my first impressions of that game, but games like that are innovative, smaller, um, and just have fresh ideas. That's where I'm more at these days,
Yeah.
and it's just more and more my portfolio is being filled with these indie
Yeah.
games. So,
And I think a lot of
to
people who
that
love
point,
a lot of people who
go
love
ahead.
gaming, that's how we feel is like, and that's what's so frustrating about this in part is that Microsoft was pretending to be like this understanding big brother, big brother, but this understanding like,
Yeah, they were kind of that good guy.
friendly.
Like, oh, they really are
Yeah,
about
they're
these
like, "Hey,
games and
we
the
love games
developers.
too. We want there to
Yeah,
be innovation, and we're going to use our power and our financial, uh, security to ensure this happens." Which, in theory, if a corporation like them did that, that would be great. The problem is, at the end of the day, these corporate interests are not innovation. They are not supporting the little guy. I think, I believe that like Phil Spencer and the Xbox team want to do that, but the problem is they're a corporation and their ultimate goal is profits for shareholders. They're a part of a much larger corporation, like one of the largest corporations on earth, and their goal is like shareholders and stock prices.
yeah,
And so it's just like, even if their intentions are good, they're part of a structure that just eventually is going to be like, how do we eke out more profits? And that, that often is at odds with like creating innovation and art.
yeah, yeah. I think one of the most interesting things that Phil Spencer and his team were able to do over the past few years is convince everyone that Microsoft were the good older brother video game company, and then Sony. Oh, Sony's this corporate, cold-hearted institution, and it's like, well, Microsoft is the exact same thing, only bigger. And so
Yeah,
I think we're
Microsoft's
starting to
arguably
see,
worse. I think
yeah,
I
we're
think the
starting to
reason
see
we were
that. So
convinced is I think Phil Spencer believes and feels that way, and I think a
yeah,
lot of people at
but he
Xbox are
can't he
trying.
can't control Microsoft. So
You can't transcend
and
the system that makes you what you are.
yeah.
That
So
sounded really
anyways,
smart. I don't even know if that's true, but
as
it sounded really good.
long as it sounds smart on the internet, that's all you have to do.
Yeah.
So, anyways, not to get too, I mean, we already did. We went way too far into news there, but that's just been fascinating to see that. And the Spotlight, I actually don't even know if this is truly an independent studio because I didn't look into it, but it is an indie type game that came out last month, and it's called Ultros. It's one that
Hmm.
kind of grabbed, I think there was like a Steam Next Fest or something, where it got quite a few eyes on it because it's very eye catching. This is a
Yeah.
2D Metroidvania game with heavy psychedelic art
Yeah.
style and theming. Like it looks like an acid trip in video game form, and that's kind of what initially got everyone's attention about this game. I mean, obviously, it's very evocative with its art style, but often when that's the case, you have to sit back and wonder: will there be any depth to this? Is it just trying
Right.
to stand out so boldly visually, but there's nothing there? I wasn't even sure. I mean, I had seen this. I wasn't sure I was ever going to play it. Um, and on a whim, it was on sale. I ended up grabbing it, ended up starting it, and it took over for me. I was in the middle of another game yet to be mentioned, and I had to take a complete hiatus from that game because this game, for 4 to 5, 6 days, maybe a week, was just like all I wanted to play when I had time. So
Hmm.
man, where to start? I will say this is a weird Metroidvania. It is just about as weird as its art style. So if you're like, I mean, if you're someone who really likes the blueprint for Metroidvanias and you just kind of want more games that are the same, maybe this isn't for you. It really brings some unique ideas to the genre, which I think is needed. For me personally, I am to the point where for the past, not quite decade, but around there, I've been really big on some of these Metroidvanias, kind of culminating in Hollow Knight, everyone's
Hmm.
game of the universe. But I have kind of since then gotten a little tired of how rote Metroidvanias can feel. If they don't bring something new, it's just kind of like, oh, let me go find my double jump, let me go find my this.
Hmm.
They can feel very by the numbers, and so, with that being the case, I kind of get bored of a lot of them. But
Yeah.
this one, Where to start? It's just I will say there's a lot less combat in this game than I expected. If you had told me that combat was like just not a focus of the game, I'm not sure that I would have that might have put me off to the game,
Mm-hmm.
to be honest. But it's kind of a refreshing take because that is the crux of almost every video game, really. Um, but so not a big focus on combat. The combat is good though. Like the combat you do in the game is good. It's well
Yep.
made. There's a very interesting. Hello, cat. She really likes that spot
She
right there.
does. She does. She has
Um,
thoughts on Ultros.
there's a very interesting mechanic, which this is a touch spoilery, but not really. You learn this pretty early on. Um, as you are killing enemies, you'll be getting kind of like battered um, parts from them, like
Mm-hmm.
battered organs or whatever. And you come to find out that the way to get better parts from the enemies you're killing is to not repeat them. Excuse me, not to repeat a move. You have to do all different moves to defeat them, and then you will get it's called a clean kill. And it's just it's a simple thing, but it's such an interesting twist on combat where then you go into a combat encounter and you're trying to really make sure that you engage with this specific move. Early on, there were moves where I'm like, oh, I'm never going to use that. Why would I use that? You know,
Yeah.
I can just mash this button. And then later on, you're like, okay, it's actually worth getting this move and worth getting this move because then it
Mm-hmm.
increases the variety that I have for these enemies that have larger health or whatever. You know, it's a
Yeah.
really interesting concept that I just feel like was far better than it had any right to be in a game where
Mm-hmm.
combat ultimately doesn't end up being the focus. So don't be afraid that combat's bad. It's good in this game. It has its nice little twist that I found very engaging.
Yeah.
It also has a very controversial structure in that it kind of can feel like a roguelike.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I've seen a lot of reviews and comments of people just being like, thumbs down, this is a roguelike. Like it didn't advertise itself as that. This is not a roguelike. It has a tinge of elements of restarting, but they're very baked into the story
Yeah.
and you don't fully restart and there's just so much other things going on that I wouldn't classify this as a roguelike. At maximum it has like 15 to 20% um roguelike elements added to the game.
Mm-hmm.
But again, don't let that put you off from this game. It's not a reason to not play this game. So I saw a lot of comments about that on
That's
reviews.
good to hear. That's one of my main complaints so far with it.
No, it's done really well. And every time you are reset, so to speak, there's enough interesting things going on or something new happening that it still feels like you're continuing exploring,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. You're just continuing the game. There's just like a minor reset.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't want to spoil too much else, but
Yeah. I
there's
will
such a
say
cool.
it
Go ahead.
feels a little bit like Hades, to an extent where it's like you die and you have to start over, but the story's progressing, and so you're like, okay, well, it helps like carry you along a little bit.
Yeah,
Um,
there that is
it's
a
I mean,
an
it's not.
interesting
It's also
comparison.
not like Hades, but it is in the sense of like I think some of the story progression keeps you going. It feels like you're still progressing in a way that it
Yeah.
isn't like a total setback. So I'm playing Ultros right now, so
Oh, you are.
that's my other game, and I'm maybe
That's
2 hours
surprising.
in, and that was one of my first. That was the main issue I had at first. It's like I started playing, I was like, "This is wild, this is cool," and then you get to like a sort of boss encounter thing, and then like some stuff happens and it sets you back uh, at the beginning. But like in this, from the story standpoint, it's still kind of going, and there's like narrative stuff as to what's happening, and
And your
so
map
that's
doesn't reset or
your
anything
map
like
doesn't
that.
reset, and so that's
Yeah.
nice. And you're like, okay, I can now look at all these places I've been, and I'm intrigued by what's happening in the story. So I was feeling a little bit worried, like how much is this going to be roguelike? Because I don't tend to love those games as much. Like there are the exceptions. Like I like Hades. I'm not fully against them, but I was like, oh, okay, maybe this is more of a roguelike game. But then I kept playing, and like you said, it doesn't seem to be the focus at all. Um, But that's the main criticism I've seen as well. Is a lot of reviews
Yeah,
are like, if this was like I loved this until I saw it was roguelike, then I'm out.
yeah. It's I wouldn't say that it is. I would say that's a mislabeling of this game, even though it does have
Yeah,
elements. And the cool thing about it is that um, it the cycles that it has, which are why people think that it's a roguelike. Um, there are gameplay mechanics baked into that again are incredibly unique and interesting and so different from anything I've seen. Um, you may not be at this point yet, but one of the core parts of this game, more so than the combat, is planting things like
yeah,
gardening, which is such a weird. Again, if you told somebody, oh yeah, there's not a big focus on combat, it has cycles where you restart, and there's a focus on gardening. Like these are just things that don't sound very good.
yeah. It's a gardening
But
roguelike.
yeah, yeah, that might actually work for some people. But there comes a point where you actually need cycles. There will come a point later in the game where you need cycles to restart in order for plants to grow or things to change in the world. And
Yeah.
it just is baked into the gameplay, and it makes a lot of sense. Um, the plant mechanics in this game, at first I was just like, man, this feels really kooky. Like I don't know about this. But
Mm-hmm.
by the end of it, you are just like you're a gardening fiend. These plants serve purposes. Like you're
Yeah.
not just gardening, which I guess that's what gardening is. You're eating, but um, they serve a purpose, and like you need certain plants to be able to get to certain areas or to do certain things. And so then you start kind of managing each cycle. You manage your seeds. You're like, oh, I don't want to plant that one here because I might need that one later here. And there's
Mm-hmm.
even further mechanics I don't want to spoil that further complicate the planting process, and also not just complicate but give you more agency with planting, and how you can manipulate your plants and different things. um, and in the end, it mostly turns into a game about connecting the entire world, um, not necessarily through plants, but I don't want to spoil it, but that becomes kind of the goal of the game, is to connect the entire world. And it
Yeah.
also works in a gameplay way because, in so many games, you just unlock a fast travel point and you're like, all right, now I can fast travel to this other
Yeah.
fast travel point because game mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
In this game, you have to connect the world in order to move around or what. It feels like such an organic
Yeah.
concept,
And
that
it
is
not
just
just connect it like
perfectly
you
done in a
push a
video game.
button. It sounds like you don't just like push a button to turn on a fast travel like you said. It's like you have to be intentional about how are you using your plant, like what are you planting where to
Yeah,
connect things in the desired way. That's really interesting, and that makes me excited for it because I will say when I first started planting things, I'm like, what is like happening? You plant
what
something
is
and then
this?
you get a food from it. But it also feels like it plays into like your skill tree, which is really interesting, where the different like you eat different foods to give you different types of stats, and once you level up certain types of stats you can use that to get different abilities. And so you have like four different colored like it's like
Yeah,
orange,
yeah,
green, pink, blue, and certain foods will give you like a lot of orange and maybe a little blue or something like that. And so like, and you also eat food to recover health, and so you're trying to manage like when I'm eating what to like um, keep myself
yeah,
healthy for combat encounters, but also like I really want to unlock this ability in my skill tree. And so whenever you like find a
yeah.
save location, you can go into your skill tree and unlock things that you have points for. And so it feels like there's a management there. And I could see
That
how
was
on
that was a really
new cycles.
interesting. Yeah, that was a
Yeah.
really interesting, unique take as well.
Hmm.
Just on like healing food items. Pretty early on, I realized, you know, if combat's not a huge focus, I'm not really needing the food as much to heal. I'm more so needing the food to unlock things, or like it's just this really interesting take. And I feel like they did that in like five, six, seven different ways in this game.
Hmm.
They had a unique idea or a very unique take on an old idea,
Yeah.
and it all works. It all synergizes so well in this game, and I'm just really impressed because coming into this game, I didn't really have any hype. I didn't have any high expectations of this game. Um, and coming out of it, it's truly one of the most unique Metroidvanias I've ever played. And because of the freshness and the way it all works together, um, I think it ranks really highly for me. This might be a top two or three Metroidvania up there with below Hollow Knight for sure, but like Is it around the Oris for me? Yeah, I think it is, because mechanically it's just so sound. And yeah, there's some interesting jank that can happen with some of these mechanics, but overall the whole world works so well together and what they try to do.
Yeah.
Um, Super cool game. If you want anything unique about a Metroidvania, I highly recommend pushing through, checking out this game, because I do think a lot of people are, if they do check it out, they're going to play the first hour or two, and then as soon as that cycle gets reset. Welcome back, everybody. We had some technical difficulties. Not even really sure where this is going to get spliced in, but I was in the middle of saying that just my ending thoughts on Ultros are, I think a lot of people are going to start this game, they're going to hit that first cycle, and they're going to drop off. And I definitely urge anyone who has any interest in what we've said or a unique take on Metroidvanias to push through that and check out the rest of this game, because it's to me it's a hidden gem that I think not enough people are going to get to experience.
Yeah. My last thoughts on it are that I initially was feeling a little bit turned off by that cycle, or that what felt like a roguelike situation, but I've progressed past that. And I feel like the first thing about this game that will hit you is it feels very different aesthetically. Like the art style and the music and the ambiance all feel very different, and it's awesome. But if you stick with it mechanically and thematically, it starts to come together too, which is cool. So it's like you said, there's something special about this game. I'm really enjoying it. It's really weird, and I like that. Like it
Hmm.
just the same, the same Metroidvania we've played 100 times.
Totally, it's weird and it's well designed. So again, another notch for the indie scene, where they take
Yeah.
risks like that, and sometimes it just really pays off. So
Hmm.
that's cool that you're starting it, though. I didn't know if my avid recommendation last month would result in you or Calvin ever actually touching it. So hopefully
Yeah,
you're
it
able
did.
to see it through and have some thoughts to validate
Yeah.
my thoughts, or
I would
otherwise.
that's Yeah, so that's my current handheld game that I'm playing when I'm not sitting down like at my console or whatever. And as much as I'm also enjoying Another Crab's Treasure, I think Ultros is very much like more my active game. So
Yeah.
I wanted to try Another Crab's Treasure, which is why I started it. But um, yeah, Ultros is good so far.
Yeah. Well, okay, so that was one of yours then.
It was also
That
one of
was one of
mine.
yours.
So
All
I don't
right.
know if we want to get into
Cross it
Rebirth
off.
yet, or if you want to go through the other ones you played, and then we could do Rebirth at the end.
Well,
Oh,
so man, oh yo, this podcast is I'm gonna have to shortcut some of this. Let me jump into Spider-Man 2 real quick before we do
right.
Rebirth.
Yeah.
I finally got to Spider-Man 2, everybody. I promised
About
that it would
time.
definitely maybe happen last month, and it did happen. It
Definitely,
did happen.
definitely, maybe did.
I opened up the little icon on my PlayStation and I clicked X, and then I started the game and was off to the races. So I was interrupted in Spider-Man 2 by Ultros, and Ultros took over my every waking thinking moment of leisure. But I did get back to Spider-Man 2, and I have thoughts. My thoughts are that I think Spider-Man 2 is way underrated. I really do. Um, I started off my playthrough very lukewarm. I was very much feeling that burnt out feeling of like, we played this game already. Um, Even some of the elements, I was early on, I was doing too much side content, which I think is a problem with game design in this game. Um, I shouldn't have to play the game the correct way for it to feel fun. But early on, I would say this is a game you should not be exploring too much or doing too much side content, because a lot of the side content in this game is very um, B tier, like not great, not to the standards that I would expect from Insomniac, and that does show a little bit. There were side quest cutscenes that just felt very unpolished and nonsensical, and it was just really throwing me off, because that's what Insomniac does. They bring you this truly polished peak of AAA experience typically. And so that was really throwing me off in the early hours, and I just felt like I've already played this game. But man, toward the mid game, I started really buckling down and just kind of focusing mostly on the story. Because as you play through the story, different side missions and new things unlock on the map. So really, I mean, do a thing here or there, but if you focus the story, that's the better way to go. And then you have all the abilities and you have new things to play with, and the map has more going on in it. Um, I just think this game is underrated. I feel like it did kind of get the treatment of this is just more Spider-Man, and it is, but there's so much here that either continues to just be excellent or is even more excellent, I think. Not the least of which we've already discussed is the gliding, what's it called? The
Web
wings.
slinging this,
The web
or
suits.
the
No.
gliding. Yeah, yeah,
What the heck are those called? Web gliding suits? I don't know. Anyways, the fact that you can basically fly through the city
yeah,
um is just it's really incredible. It really is. And I think it would be really hard to go back and play the other Spider-Man games as good as they are, because swinging just is not fast enough now. When you can fly through the city and you got
hmm
these air tunnels, I mean, getting to fly around and through the different bridges connecting Manhattan to Brooklyn and the other parts of the city is just so cool, especially having been spent quite a bit of time around the Manhattan Bridge and the Brooklyn Bridge. It's so cool. It's such a fantasy to be able
yeah,
to fly through those in a video game. That alone is fantastic. So the movement, I think, is noticeably a step up in this game. And then the other thing is just the story. I think the story is actually really good. I was skeptical at first, but just the way that they did Venom, um, having it be, which I believe Venom has been, or Harry Osborn has been affected by Venom in some of the comics, but it's a very niche take. And the way that they did it, it just was so good. I don't want to spoil everything, but just it's been a while at this point, honestly. But the kind of character development or plot development of how Venom comes into the story, um, originally with Harry Osborn, and it's kind of this great thing, and they're being Spider-Men together, and Harry is such a likable guy in this game, especially early on. Like their friendship, I thought was so well done, and I genuinely cared about their friendship. It was a beautiful friendship that they had, and that works so well to the story's advantage because as you go through the twists and turns and the ups and downs and everything that happens with Harry Osborn, it affects you. You feel that emotion in a similar way that I remember feeling in Miles Morales, which they did an excellent job with the emotion in that game as well. So, um, I thought they balanced playing both Spider-Man very well. I also loved the dynamic between Miles and Peter in this game, where I thought it could be kind of overindulgent or just like, why do we have two Spider-Man in one game? Is it going to be too much? I thought it was done really well where, eventually Peter, he's no longer himself a little bit. He's kind of starting to drift, and Miles is kind of this forgotten Spider-Man at this point, kind of having to do things on his own because Peter wants to do everything on his own. And just that dynamic I thought was also done really well, ultimately culminating in Miles having a bit of a coming of age story as Spider-Man, which if he didn't already in his game back in 2020, but especially in this game, kind of he still has these insecurities about, is he as good as Peter? Can he handle things on his own? And that's kind of his character arc. So I just thought there was so many good characters. The villains in this game I thought were way better than 2018, especially getting to open up with Sandman, and then you get the Lizard, which was an awesome boss fight. Obviously, you have all of the Venom stuff, which is really cool. I was also really surprised at how good the Hunter. What was his name? Does he have a different name than the Hunter?
Craven the Hunter.
Craven the Hunter. I thought that was really tacky, especially in the promotional stuff. I was just like, whatever. But it was a really cool concept, and I felt like his character and his minions and everything were actually done pretty well. And overall, I just thought this was a total blast, like a AAA blockbuster, good time, which are rarer and rarer these days. And I had a lot of fun with it. I remember flying around towards the end of the game, flying. There's also moments in this game where the city changes drastically, and there's just crazy stuff going down in New York. And
hmm
you know, it's so comic book in that way, but it's a visual spectacle too. This game runs well, which is another thing you can't count on anymore. I mean, it runs at 60. I played it at 40 FPS, the balanced version for a while, and I was like, man, this looks so good. But ultimately, I ended up switching to 60 still because it looks almost just as good. Runs
Yeah,
crazy smooth.
I remember the performance mode running is so good that the difference was pretty hard to tell most of the time. Like
Yeah,
you can tell, but like not a lot. Like you lose yourself quickly in it, and then you get those smooth frames.
I'm trying not to forget anything. I really liked the spider bot missions. It felt so Ratchet and Clank. You can see their Ratchet and
I
Clank
loved
DNA in
the
those missions.
I was wondering what you're going to think of those because the spider
Yeah,
bot
they're so
missions,
good.
they were a lot of fun and they very much felt like the Clank missions in Ratchet and Clank in a good way. Yeah,
And
I
it feels
totally
good to
agree.
control them and just the sense of scale changing. I thought those were a total blast. Anytime I got to be the spider bot, I was
Yeah.
having a good time. The slipstream, there's slipstream missions where you basically have to follow a drone and collect data for a certain amount of time. Data. And they're simple, but it's just like, you know, that your gliding mechanic is good in this game, so make a mission based around it, and that's all it is.
Yeah.
For like 2 minutes you have to very carefully follow this drone that is weaving through buildings and going up and down and trying to attack you, and it's just fun because it's fun to do that in the game. I
Yeah.
think this game is it also improved on the Mary Jane missions. A lot of the there were times where the dichotomy between being Spider-Man and being Peter Parker or being Mary Jane kind of has to exist for the story. We've discussed this, but there were moments where they take you out of the suit and you're just kind of, it turns into a walking simulator around a school or something, and those are good for story development. There were early on, I felt like there were too many of those where you're just slow walking through an environment with exposition being given to you. That feels a little antiquated at this point, but I will say they've improved on the Mary Jane missions um, tenfold, in my opinion. I hated them in 2018. People wanted them to get rid of them. As soon as they did one, I was like, seriously, you brought this back? But giving her a weapon and making it more of an active stealth situation where you're not just stealthing, but you can actually take out enemies and kind of plan, I thought was way more engaging. I actually enjoyed them. I had no issue with them in this game. Um, I do think this game is at its best gameplay wise when you are clearing out a base. I think the most fun I had is tracking down the Craven bases. There was like 4 of them that you have to find the location of, and it's just a huge base full of Craven's minions, and you're just, you know, you can go in balls to the wall and just, you know, take everyone out, but the real fun is navigating through the base and more surgically removing everybody in stealth. And I just think that's when the addition of, speaking of mechanics that are infinitely better than 2018 or Miles, the ability to create your own web line anywhere is just like, it would be hard to go back to the other games because there were so many times where it's like, this guy's over here, I can't get him because there's nothing above him to hang out on. And here you can just create webs across the ceiling wherever you want, stealth take everyone out. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
I do feel like in a lot of ways they perfected um, their version of Spider-Man. And now, do I need more? Maybe not. I'll still play it. I feel like they've perfected it here. I would love to see Insomniac focus elsewhere, but because it's Marvel and the money it brings in, we're going to see more of them. But yeah, I was just surprised at the end of it. I really came around to thinking, man, I feel like this game did not get enough praise or attention for being as good as it is, and I think it's a little reductive to just say it's more Spider-Man. But
Yeah.
there's my take.
I guess some more sort of spoilers, but how did you enjoy the ending sequence with Venom?
The ending sequence with Venom.
Just like the last boss fight and
Oh, I
the,
thought it was awesome. I mean, it's
yeah.
so epic. It's so
Yeah.
stinking epic. I mean, the whole ending of the game is just like, the city is taken over by Venom, and you see these spiraling red glowing Venom tendrils coming out of the city. And oh no, did we lose you again? No, you're here. Okay. Oh, you froze. And I was like, oh, I'm by myself again.
I know.
Um, yeah, and then the multi sequence at the end. I even loved the beginning. I think with Mary Jane, you start as her, and you're kind of trying to sneak out, and you ultimately have to fight one of these giant Hulk looking Venom monsters, um,
Mm-hmm.
and escape. And then I think from there you have this whole battle. I mean, he like destroys the school, which is harkens, I don't want to say harkens 7 times in this episode, but like kind of draws you back to the story development of where they became best friends and their high school days. He just destroys the school, and you have floating platforms of like the football field, and
Yeah.
you're having just this
The
insane
cafeteria or
battle.
whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
insane battle with Venom. And you're like, oh, this is crazy. And then after that, you have an insane battle with Venom as Miles, and and then Venom sprouts wings, and just everything is so over the
Yeah.
top in the best way.
Yeah.
Um, and then the ending scene with when Venom is finally, they save the day and whatever, and the interaction between Mary and it sounds weird to say Mary Jane, I guess. Can you?
Yeah. Mary
Is she
Jane.
ever called Mary?
Mm-mm. Mary Jane is
MJ,
the full name. Yeah.
Peter, and Harry at the
Yeah.
end is very emotional. I thought everything was tied up super well. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Awesome. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I liked it a lot too. I had some qualms with it. Um, but I feel like you did a great job explaining what worked so well about it. I also
What were your
loved.
biggest qualms then?
Oh, it's been long enough now that I don't know if they were as big as I thought. The pacing felt a little bit weird to me, and I think some of that is
That
that.
was one you said to me where I was playing through the game and I'm like, man, I feel like you must, and it's not your fault, um, because you can't ever blame pacing on the player. Although in open world games you do have a measure of control to your pacing, but
And that's therein lies the problem.
I
I don't,
did wonder if some of your pacing problems just had to do with the story. Like if Peter is in his bad guy dancing phase, and then you
yeah,
go and do a side mission as Peter and he's helping someone out and stuff, there can be like a contradiction feeling in the way where Peter's at in the story. And
yeah.
that's a problem I don't know how you fix, other than getting, like, saying you can't do certain missions at some point in the story, which could also be frustrating. But I did wonder if that's why you had pacing issues, if you did certain side missions or side content at a point in the story where the characters were somewhere else.
I think that's like the way I approached it was very. I was like, I'm going to try and clear everything out as I go. And like you said, this game, like as you go through the game, it unlocks a lot of stuff that makes it fills out the map and makes it more interesting to do more things. But also, I tried to do all the side stuff, and I think a lot of the side content wasn't great, and I think that probably messed with my feeling of the pacing. Um,
Yeah,
I don't know. It's been like 5-6 months since I played it, which is enough for me to start forgetting. I also remember feeling like the game was a little bit short for how much happens in it, which is I don't know, it's kind of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's nice because it doesn't feel like you're in this drawn-out experience where you're getting bored and they're trying to stretch
yeah.
things out too much. Um, on the other hand, it felt like it felt a bit chaotic, and like sometimes chaotic can be good, but it just felt like so much was going on, and
You felt the
I feel
same
like
amount of story should have been just stretched out a little
just
bit.
a little, yeah, maybe just a little. Like it
Interesting.
feels like some of the beats, I just wanted mainly with the main story, but at the same time, it was cool. I mean, looking back on it, um, I really liked the stuff with Harry. Like you said, I feel like they did a good job setting up like drama and tension with their friendship, and like they did a good job with the story being revolving around the relationships at the core, which is what Spider-Man always when Spider-Man does that, it always is interesting. Um, and then all of the ending stuff with the symbiotes and with Venom was just awesome. Like that's Venom is my favorite Spider-Man villain, so getting to play as him a little bit and then also getting to fight him multiple times as both Spider-Man was cool. Um, and like you said, one of my worries going into this game was that um, is it going to be excessive to have both Spider-Man, or am I only going to use one Spider-Man? And they managed to require you to use both of them in a way that made sense and was satisfying, and that also really served the story. That was what I was excited, because I was like, oh, is it just going to be a thing where like
Yeah, yeah.
I can just kind of pick and choose whichever one I'm going to be, and then it's going to be what it
Oh,
is. But
also, I forgot to mention another dynamic. Miles and Mr. Negative, I forget his name.
yeah,
Um, their whole relationship dynamic and the way it was developed, super cool. And I just thought the writing was done really well. Like at no point did I feel that the main story itself was corny or poorly written. The characters felt real in
hmm
the things that they were going through. Um, that was another
yeah.
relationship
Well,
dynamic
that
that I really
that
enjoyed.
gave him kind of a parallel to Peter. Like they both had their own story of like an internal darkness, and like do they let the darker
Yeah,
side of their nature win? So yeah,
totally.
there was good writing, and I love the ending sequence with Venom. It was so epic, like you said. I liked it. I mean, I think my my overall impressions back when we first talked about it was very positive. Like, this is a great game. So, uh,
So
yeah,
interesting though. With open world games, your mileage will vary because as far as the game being weirdly paced or the game being too short, which I've actually heard back when it came out, a lot of people were saying it felt a little short. And man, I did
yeah,
not have that feeling at all. I thought this game was the perfect length. I thought the
that's a
pacing was
blessing these
done really
days.
well.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so it's so interesting how that can happen in an
yeah.
open
I
world
wish I
game, and
could
that's kind of the
remember.
pitfall of it. So
Yeah, I think that's true. So it was good overall. I really enjoyed it. And, like you said, the gliding and just some of the new things they do with traversal and combat and
yeah,
story and character, they managed to make like a really good successor to everything they've built. And I don't know where they go
yeah.
from here either. Like I feel like at this point it has to start feeling like, okay, this is just more. But they did a
Like
good
you
job
did
of
it.
this
You
game
did your take
feeling.
on Spider-Man, but
Yeah,
that won't be the
yeah.
end. So yeah, towards the end when I was cleaning up the map, I was flying around New York, and I was just like, man, you know how you when you log out of a game for the last time, it's you don't
Hmm.
usually think about it, but I was sitting there thinking, man, I'm enjoying this, and I'm kind of gonna miss flying around New York. Like someday I'll have to pop back in and just do this for a few minutes because it's just that good. So
Yeah, totally, totally.
glad I got to it. It took me a while. I missed the zeitgeist at first, and I knew I'd come back to it when I didn't want to waste a
Yeah.
full blown Spider-Man game that Insomniac made because they are very good, and I wanted to be in the right headspace for it, and it certainly clicked for me. So
Cool. I'm glad you waited until it was the right time, and I'm glad you played it. It's a good game.
yeah, definitely. So let's hear Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Is it a good game?
Oh, yes.
Is
It
it
is a
long enough?
no. I wish it was twice as long. I rolled credits on Final Fantasy VII Rebirth 6 hours ago or something, um, and I think I put in 124 hours, 123 hours, something like that.
Good grief!
And that's not like the PlayStation clock. The game clock for Final Fantasy when you save it, like after a few
Right,
minutes of inactivity, it pauses it. So it's like it's a fairly accurate
it's pretty accurate.
estimate. Um,
When was the
where
last
do I
time you
even
put
begin?
124 hours into a game, man? I don't know if you have.
Oh, I have Elden Ring. I think was in that
You think you
ballpark.
did? Okay,
I
all
think
right.
Elden Ring was 115 is what it took me to beat it. And
Well, that's crazy. It does feel like
Breath of
you've
the
been
Wild's
playing
probably in there
Rebirth. Yeah, it
for
does feel like you've been
ages.
playing
I
Rebirth for
mean,
as long as I can remember at this point.
I saw Dune Part 2 on opening day, and I started Rebirth the night before that. So it's been since the end of February. Now, to be fair, there's a couple of weeks in March where I didn't play anything because just work
Right.
and life stuff. So, but still, I mean, this game takes a couple of months. It's really long. For the most part, that's fine. Like this game, I would say this game mostly didn't overstay its welcome. By the end, I was kind of like, okay, it feels good to be wrapping this up just because there's, so much. Um, it I need more time to like for my
Process.
to process, for my opinions to bake, especially about certain aspects of this game. I think the best way I can summarize it is that this game in some ways is like a masterpiece and in other ways is like weird and frustrating, which is kind of how remake felt a little bit, and I feel like this is that but even more. um
Hmm.
how do I explain this? um I think if you liked remake, you'll like this. It's really good. It's a really fun experience. Um, and I feel like this game works. It's kind of the sum is greater than its parts situation where there are aspects of this game that are maybe not outstanding, but that serve the overall game really well. And so, you know, Final Fantasy VII Remake felt very linear, and it kind of like was forcing you through all these corridors all the time. It was a
Yeah,
great game,
for
but
sure.
this game very much is like a counterpoint to that, where you spend a lot of the game in more of an open world dynamic where it gives you a lot of freedom to explore and do these other things. There are still linear sections to the game, but a lot of it is very open. And a good example of what I'm talking about is like they rely on some very basic open world tropes, like you find a tower to find unlock like an area on the map. Like here's some things on the map you can then go investigate once you unlock the tower. So it's kind of like regional towers you unlock. Um, Going in like clearing out all the icons on your map. That's like the most basic open world thing. But for some reason, that paired with the story and the world and the characters worked really well, and it was kind of just a vehicle to serve you this story, which was an opening up of Final Fantasy VII and going from the confined like claustrophobia of Midgar to the wider world and experiencing how much more is beyond Midgar, and raising the stakes of the world and the story, and like understanding what's at stake beyond Midgar. Like the whole planet is involved, and this really makes like you're on a journey across the planet, across continents. You're not just like exploring one continent with all these regions. Like you're going across different continents, and it really
Hmm.
feels epic in scope. And then what I think part of what works so well is like these characters, you know, uh, Tifa, Aerith, Barrett, and in the rest too. But these are some of the best characters I think in video games ever. If I had to pick a favorite like crew of video game characters, it would be the Final Fantasy VII crew, and especially their dynamic together. Like the friendships just feel so real. The romances feel so possible, but also, um, fraught. Um, and getting to explore this whole world with like your friends and go on these different adventures, and you have story beats where you spend time with this person or that person, and it kind of mixes up which group you're playing with. And so, I think one thing that often happens in RPGs with large casts of party members is that you'll kind of pick your favorites in terms of what works really well for combat, and you'll stick to that a lot. But this very much designed the game in a way where you got to experience all of the characters in different situations, both mechanically and story wise. Like you got a furthering of story for all of the characters, and you got to learn the backstory of certain characters we didn't get as much of in the first one, and like there's a lot of emotional resonance with that. This brings to life character interactions and locations and just epic moments that are just infamous in gaming. Infamous is the wrong word because that implies bad, but that are just like so famous in gaming history.
Iconic.
Iconic, thank you. And it it brings that to life. And I think now part of that, like I really wonder, someone who never played the original, how you're going to feel. But I think it'll be like remake where you'll still really like a lot of this. um it manages to like fulfill
So
a childhood
yeah,
dream.
so much of this sounds overwhelmingly positive, but you
It
seem
is.
conflicted still. So what are your
Okay,
main
so
tenets of confliction?
yeah. um so there are some aspects of like the gameplay loop that are a little clunky, so, and this is where like some of the open world stuff is kind of basic, but I feel like it all melds together in a way that it gives you this vehicle to experience this game in this world really well. um but there are still some of those frustrating things where there are there are a lot of mini games in this game, and I loved a lot of the mini games. The original has a lot of mini games, and this uses like revitalized versions of those from the original game, and a lot of those I liked, but there were so many. And by the end of the game, you're kind of like, all right, like there is a mini game fatigue, especially later in the game, and not all of them are required. Like some of them are,
Dang.
a decent amount of them are optional, and I hate saying it this way because I feel like if you're averse to mini games like you are, you're going to immediately be like, oh, I'm not going to like this. But
I know if
a lot,
you're getting fatigued on the mini games, I'm like, man,
it took
that
it took
doesn't
a
bode well for
it
me.
took a while, but it's I liked most of the mini games to varying
Yeah,
degrees, but there was a point near the end where it's like you sometimes do have to do mini games,
too
and there's
much
a
of a
point like
focus.
later in the game where like they introduce a new mini, like in the last, I don't know, third or quarter of the game they introduced a new mini game, and it was pretty complicated, and I just remember being like, oh, like I have to sit and learn like how this
Let
whole
me
thing
learn this
works.
new chess game that you've
It,
invented so that I can beat Final Fantasy VII
yeah,
Rebirth.
kind of. So there's some of there's some of that, but on the flip side, like some of the mini games, like I loved Queen's Blood. I'm Queen's Blood was just simple enough, but just enough depth that kept it
Yeah.
interesting the whole way through. I had a blast with that. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag, but overall, I would say the mini games are overall positive for me as well. It's just there's a bit of that fatigue. Um, I think um, the other thing that I'm torn on at this point is some of the story decisions, and I can't go obviously too much into what that means. Um,
Deviations from the original. plot
Yes.
wise.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's not necessarily that they're making deviations, but I've heard
What
this put
deviations
more.
they chose?
Yeah, well, and the inability to really pick a lane, I think, is maybe what it's feeling like.
Ooh, that's the worst.
Now, we haven't got the third part yet, so I'm conflicted on the ending. Um,
Okay.
and I maybe we'll have to do a spoiler version someday. But
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
will
for
say
sure.
is, in remake, they very much established this, like,
Anything can
the
happen.
whispers are changing fate. Anything can happen.
Yeah.
This is not the same story you experienced back in the day. And
But then
I
it
remember
feels like they didn't commit in this game. Instead, they're still kind of waffling on like, but we
there,
want to make
yeah.
everyone happy.
Well, and it's like, here's the problem: is the original story was so good that it's like, if you're gonna change it,
It's got
it's
to be
got to
good.
be really good. And I worry the way this second one ends is it's still very much like, we need to see how the third part plays out for me to be able
Yeah.
to give an actual verdict. But the way it feels right now is like they're trying to do another ending to keep it, and it's like, I understand to an extent they want to keep it interesting and they want to do something different. And I think that could be cool, but they recognize how iconic and impressive the storytelling is in the original, and so they're very closely following that. And I can't explain how, but they're it's almost like they're kind of waffling between both versions of the story, and it simultaneously too close and too
Mm,
different to the original, that
yeah.
it fumbles it a little. And I think
The
the
first
most,
game really sets up that it's going to be different, but that contradicts the fact that they want to visit all the same places and hit all the same story beats.
yeah, and it's even visiting the same places isn't so bad as it's like, yeah, the story beats and how it plays out. um and ultimately, what's really frustrating is some of the climactic moments in this game at the very end. I feel like emotionally don't resonate as well as the original because they're not picking a lane as much. It's because
Yeah.
part of it is, it's like, well, all possibilities, like, and it kind of leaves it very much like, you know, it's a little confusing is the other problem. And it's very muddled as to, okay, I feel like it's kind of like a Christopher Nolan movie. You're like, wait a second,
I feel like we're
let me
getting
try
into
and
Kingdom Hearts territory here.
it's a little bit Kingdom Hearts territory. And I'm worried about that. Like, I don't want this to be like, you
Hmm.
know, Sora is nobody's Ansem, or Ansem's nobody, his secret shadow, which is actually
Oh
Riku, is,
God,
it's
no.
like, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. I mean,
Okay.
this
Yeah,
still is
yeah.
the Final Fantasy VII story, but it's kind of Christopher Nolan-esque in that, I mean, they even said that in the original with like the diverging, the divergence of fate in the whispers. They're kind of playing
Right.
around with, like, there's different possibilities, and with that it gets confusing as to, okay, what's actually happening and what is going to be the result of this. And so there's the confusion aspect, but I feel like there's a key moment in this game that the confusion and this kind of waffling really took the air out of it. It took the thunder out of this moment in this. And it's hard to say how much of this is nostalgia, but there's this moment that I remember as a 11 or 12-year old when I experienced this for the first time, that just, it was like, it was a mind-blowing moment in video games. And this one, it just does not hit the same way. And it's a shame because I feel like the part of why I love Rebirth is they gave you the experience of, like, the developing a friendship and relationship with these characters and going on this adventure in a way where some of the things they expound on, like in remake, you get to experience more with Jessie and go
Yeah, you
see
get way
her
more attached to
family.
Jesse and Wedge and
I feel like
what's
when
the
they
other guy?
expound a little bit on existing character relationships, it
It should
it
make you
just
feel
adds,
the lower parts more.
well, and I think those things add to it and are so good. And it's like, there are
Yeah,
some of these
absolutely.
moments in Rebirth too where it's like you get these additional character interactions between characters you love that just add so much emotional resonance to it. And then when the end is a bit more confusing, it feels like the plot takes over a little bit, and it's more like, okay, things are getting a bit off the walls, and it's kind of a bit Marvel explosion-y.
Gotcha.
it it's tough because I love the epic nature of it. Like, I like the idea of taking risks, but I feel like they simultaneously take risks and don't. And so I don't know. I need some time to think about it. It's
Mm.
very much going to depend on how they resolve the third one. Like, I think they could stick a landing. And this is still very good. Like, I'm still in 9 out of 10 territory overall. Like, this delivered so much for me that is just going to be unforgettable. Um, but there are some key things that are really, really frustrating. And
Interesting.
so I
Interesting.
don't know.
You
I,
really
I
you
kind of,
really
it,
hope that when they start these projects that are trilogies, we all think of Star Wars or things like that. You think surely they have a plan. Surely they have the ending in mind, and they've now broken this up into three pieces that they feel they can tell well and as their own piece. But man, so often it's just not the case. They, for some reason, they don't have a plan, and I
they
hope that's
don't.
not the case here. I hope they came into this and they said we have a plan for how this story goes differently and how it ends, and then they worked backwards, because if not,
It feels a little bit
this could be a
like,
major miss.
it
We'll
feels a
know in
little bit more
2030.
like, true. Yeah. It's going to be 5 years. I will say it feels a little bit more like they don't quite have the confidence to commit to their plan than it is that they don't have one. Part of what's frustrating about this is it's unlike the most recent like Star Wars trilogy where it's like they just had no plan. By the end you're like,
Yeah,
all right. Here we have one of the greatest games of all time that exists. And so yeah, if they have to modify it a little bit to cut it up into three cleanly, but not really. Like the ending point I thought was going to be this game was the ending point. So it's
yeah.
like it worked well. Like they had to shuffle a couple things around for sure and do a few things, but it's like the story is there and it's so good. And I can't help but wish like that game is such a masterpiece, the original, that it's like I would not have minded if we just did a remake of the original cut up into
Yeah.
three that expound on things, like do it, like add some
More
flair, add some,
relationships, more.
sure,
Yeah,
even add some, like they add some subplots and characters in the two games that aren't in the originals. I'm
totally.
fine with that for the most part too. Like add those things, like give it your own take. I think it kind of becomes its own thing anyway just by doing that. But I feel like by trying to like over like course like kind of overcorrect on the we got to make a statement and we got to say something about the meta narrative and we have to make this our own identity of Final Fantasy, and I feel
Which
like
is
it's
funny
just
because it's the same creators. I'm pretty sure it's them
it
wanting
is,
to
yeah,
bring it up to date as their final hurrah for Final Fantasy VII remake,
it
as far as
is,
I
yeah.
understand. So
The
it's not like
original
new guys
creators are
coming in and be like,
involved.
we got to make it our own,
Yeah, true.
But
I mean the original creators are definitely involved, so but it just feels like I kind of wish they would just do that because I don't feel like, I don't know. And here's the thing, if they really committed to it being different,
you think they still could? So you're at the end of game 2 and you still think they could do that? Because that's mind-boggling to me. I would assume that by the end of this game, we would have diverged enough in some major plot points that it wouldn't feel like they could just continue a retelling in the third.
well, yeah, I mean, to an extent, they can't. There are some major things that are
Okay.
different that are that
Because
will
if
make
not,
like,
I'd be like, well, what are we doing? What was the point of the first game?
yeah, no, I mean that's what I say by waffling is there are some things they've changed enough, but I don't feel
Okay.
like they've committed enough either. Like where they, without going into spoilers, it's hard to
Yeah,
convey.
we'll have to
I think ultimately it's like
revisit this.
emotionally the waffling hurts the emotional core of the story more than anything else,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
the clarity of like ultimately like in the original it's kind of clear of like some of these things happen, and here's how it impacted the characters in the world, and here's how it set up the final act of the game to be so like tense and epic, and like you feel like I have to step up and save the world because of all these things that have happened. Whereas with this, it's like it's more muddled, and you still feel like you have to save the world, but it's also kind of like a little bit like what's happening. Um, so I don't know. I need more time to process it. It's a weird feeling because in some ways this game it's one of the best things I've played in a long time, and it delivered so many things for me. Like this game enveloped me for months, but also there are some issues I have with it that I'm worried
Hmm.
about. So
Well, we
you
will
should
revisit
absolutely
it
play it though.
because
Yeah.
I mean, I will. I'm going to play it at some point. I am very much daunted by the scope of this game at this point. The amount of time that you and others I know have played this game is very daunting to me at this point. Um, but I will get into it. I will play it. We'll revisit. It'll be easy to revisit at
Mhm.
that point because I will bring it up as a game I finished or played or whatever, and then we can all discuss spoilers and
Yeah, we should
my take
definitely do
on it.
that.
So
One last
that'll
thing
be
I will say
interesting.
is one last thing on this is that to be fair, I never thought a remake of Final Fantasy VII was even possible. Like not only that it like that a corporate that the corporation would green light it, but that it could come to fruition. And so the fact that this exists is such a special thing, and it's like I'm kind of just happy even if they fumble some things, and even if it's like frustrating in some ways, it is a good experience overall. And I'm excited that we have something that is like you get to experience this game in high fidelity in a way that mostly works still.
Yeah.
So I'm still very grateful that we have this, but
Fair enough. I mean, I
there you go.
probably would have never experienced this story in any capacity if they hadn't remade it. I don't know that I would have ever gone back and played the original. So, you know, at least there's that. At least we have it. So, um, all right, this is gonna be a long this month in gaming. I'll be quick here. My last thing is I have I have repicked up Destiny 2.
Oh boy.
Oh boy. Yeah, yeah. So this month they released a new season, and it's called Into the Light, I believe. And what's different about this season is that it's free for everybody. Lots of new content coming in, none of it being pay gated. And that's my biggest issue with Destiny, and has been for a long time, is how segmented all of their product is. The fact that you can go buy a season pass, but now the dungeons are separate. And oh, if you want this exotic quest that was probably part of some little package you never buy, it's a giant cluster. It has been for a long time. I maintain that they need to make all past content available to everyone at a certain point. Games like WoW, when a new expansion comes out, all the other expansions are just part of the game at that point. And it boggles the mind that Destiny is as poorly monetized and sold as it is currently. So that's kept me away for a long time. And I've got to
Poorly
say,
monetized for the consumer, not for the
I think
corporation.
even for them, to be honest,
Although you got to think it hurts them. Yeah, I know.
I think it's so badly done that even those that might spend money are just like put off by it. So I think it's
That's
bad all
certainly been
around,
my
to be
yeah
honest.
yeah.
Um, I will say, trying to get back into it, such a pain in the butt. As someone who hasn't touched Destiny in like 2 years plus, I don't know how long it's been. Um, Literally just booting it up, it is a visual overload of like nonsense. You don't know what to do. And the game doesn't
Yeah.
even know what to tell you to do, and I have to rant for a second here. I'm enjoying my time now, but man, the game doesn't even know what to tell you to do, because I boot up Destiny 2 for the first time in years, and it gives me a cutscene and drops me in a mission. And I'm like, oh, I guess this is what I have to do. I come out of the mission a half an hour later, and it was a random story mission from like an expansion 2 years ago or something. I log back out, I log back in, different cutscene,
Mhm.
different thing happening. Finally, I just started skipping everything and going to orbit till it stopped. And at that point, you've got just X amount of
Oh,
missions, X amount of icons, and you literally don't know where to start. It took me,
oh man.
and this is a hard thing to Google too, it took me legitimately probably an hour or two to figure out how to access the new seasonal content that had just started. And
Jeez.
at the end of the day, it ended up being an icon on the map that I had mistook for something else, because their naming is also retarded. They called it Into the Light, and they had an expansion called Lightfall, Light this, Light that. Like,
Yeah.
it's very hard to tell.
And
But seriously,
you're a pretty experienced Destiny player. You've played
yeah,
years and
I
years of
played a lot.
Destiny. Like I can't can you imagine they don't have new players.
No, it's
There's no way
so
they have
bad.
new players. Yeah.
No, it's so bad. And people have said the new player onboarding is so bad. It has not gotten better.
There
It's a
isn't new player
complete
on board.
mess.
There can't be new
There
players.
is not.
I don't understand if they're good because
Yeah.
I tried logging into Destiny probably 2 or 3 years ago now, and it had been a couple years for me, and it was similar, not quite that bad, but similar. Where it's like it dropped me into a cutscene, and then I got out of the cutscene, and I was like, okay, and then I realized I'm not even doing the thing I just paid. I
Yeah.
just bought this new expansion, and I was like, I don't know what to do or where to go, and it's so
And as a
bad.
testimony to how bad it is, I am someone who has put hundreds of hours into Destiny over the course of its 1 and 2. I've decided I want to return for the final expansion and see where this goes. It feels like Bungie has taken a lot of L's, rightly so. Their back is against the wall, and it seems like they're making some good decisions finally. And I'm just like, you know what? Even if it's just for one expansion, I want to drop in. I want to enjoy this final raid, because some of the raiding experiences in Destiny are some of the coolest moments in gaming I've ever had. So
Yeah.
I'm a past player making a decision I want to return for this final expansion, and I literally over the first 3 hours of trying to reestablish and understand this game, I was on the verge of just deleting it several times. How
Jeez.
bad? How bad of an experience do you have for that use case? Like, I'm not a new player just casually like, let me check this out. I'm someone
Yeah.
who actively has played the game and actively wants to try and get back into it. And it's such a turnoff the way they've done everything. It's a giant mess. There's my rant done for the most part. I did finally get into the seasonal content. They've introduced a horde mode, which has been asked for a long time, and it's a nice way to get back into the game because the gunplay has always been great in Destiny, and you just fight a
Yeah.
ton of enemies. They have a bunch of returning weapons that some of which I even know, and they have cool little shiny variants like shiny Pokemon you're trying
Hmm.
to catch, and it's got a good gameplay loop in that way. And then just recently they released something called the Pantheon, which is basically a boss gauntlet, similar to what you might see in like a Sekiro, where you just bosses, 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 and it's they pull different bosses from different raids, and you just fight them in a row, and you have to complete them all in a row. There's no like checkpoints or anything. Granted, if a group falls apart, you can join in the middle or whatever, but like there's no checkpoints. You have to beat it all in a row, and every week they add a new boss, and it gets slightly more difficult, and they're doing that until the release of the final shape in June. And it reminds me a lot of back in Destiny 1, the swan song for Destiny 1, where they brought back all of the raids that were in Destiny 1. I forget what it was called. It was Iron Banner themed. I can't remember the name of this, but like they brought back all the raids from Destiny 1, and they were on a cycle. Every week it was a different raid that was focused on. They updated all of the raid loot so that it looked super cool. It was glowing, it was doing all this cool stuff. Everyone was playing all the raids, super fun. Kind of has that feel to it where like I'm dropping in and I'm doing some encounters I've never seen before, raids I skipped out on. And the season, it's just been fun. It's been fun. I've gotten back into it. It's when it's good, it's good. And I just hope that they can deliver a good expansion, and I hope they can figure out their pricing method in a better way moving forward. Because I think that Bungie has kind of thought, oh, we're gonna move on from Destiny, and we're gonna be doing what's their new thing they unveiled.
Oh yeah, I'm forgetting what it's called, but
I don't
it's
remember the name of it, but oh, this will blow up just as big, and it's like you have a golden goose in Destiny that you have treated poorly for far too long, and you can't act like it's just that easy to create a new game that's going to be as successful, especially when it's quite different from Destiny. Like you're not going to get Destiny players going over to play an extraction PvP shooter. Like it's just different. And so it's been
mhm.
weird to see them kind of just like not value Destiny as much in the recent years when it's a pillar in the industry. No one has been able to really compete with Destiny and what it does. So I hope that they have seen the light. They're gonna treat Destiny the way it should be treated, but hopefully treat players better with their pricing models and everything. Because I would love to be able to recommend and be like, yeah, Zach, yeah, friends, come back and let's play some Destiny like the old times. It's still a mess. The bright side is, if you have someone that can help you, that will go a long way. Someone who's like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, I could drop in, don't mess with any of this. Here's the new season stuff. I could tell you at this point pretty easily
Yeah.
how to start the season. That's so helpful. If you have nobody, it's going to be a giant mess. But the season is fun. I'm enjoying it, and yeah, I think I'm going to see this through the final shape. Check out the ultimate conclusion to the Light and Darkness saga in Destiny 2. And I did not start the year thinking I was going to do that, and I almost didn't several times while trying. But here we are. So it's been
I mean, no one does raids like Destiny or like Bungie.
that's really
So,
what it comes down to.
and like you said, some of the most epic moments in my gaming history have been like for me the Taken King raid with what was his name?
Yep,
Oryx.
Oryx, and they've brought
That
that back. That's in Destiny
right.
2,
Yeah.
the full raid, and also Oryx is one of the boss fights in the Pantheon. So
Cool. Yeah, I just that was that whole raid was just like nothing else. And going through the end of that was such a unique and special experience that I get, like, there's a reason why it's still around and people still love it. Like, and the gunplay's great. Like, there's some
Yeah,
great
there's
things about
nothing
it. It's
like a
just,
raid in Destiny. There really is
there's
nothing
not,
like it.
there really isn't. So part of me, like, I feel like I just don't have the time to like get up to the point where I could even do
Yeah,
it.
you probably don't.
Um, but I want to, because it's like, it's so incredible and epic, and I'm sure they will do some cool things, um, in the raid for this. So I look forward to, at the very least, hearing about it.
Yeah, yeah. We'll see how it goes. I've enjoyed it though. Man, raiding is just, it's fun, but it's also frustrating. I really wish that, this is just not my life, but it would be so cool to have a group of friends that you could raid with regularly, because one of
Yeah.
the biggest frustrations about raiding is finding random people all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and it just being a disaster at least 50% of the time, where it's just like you'll spend an hour and a half, 2 hours on this one encounter, and you're just like, I just want to finish this. And you do all that, and it's so frustrating, but it's ultimately worth it in the moments where you have a group that comes together and you complete this epic thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that rush, that Dark Souls feeling of completing something, and it's not just you're with 5 other people, and
Yeah.
it's an accomplishment. It really is, and it's also a spectacle. um there's nothing like it. So the frustration
Mm-hmm.
and the elation all in one package. We'll see how far this. I'm really curious to see, especially after Final Shape. If Final Shape comes out and it's a fantastic and it's amazing and it's the best expansion they've released, I'm really curious to see, because they seem to have a vision for what Destiny 2 is beyond this. This
Yeah.
is a major conclusion. I wonder if we're going to get a Destiny 3. I'm sure Sony would want that. Maybe a lot of players would want that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm curious to see what they do.
Yeah.
But
Same.
I do hope that they do something good, because the industry with a good Destiny is far better than an industry with a bad or no Destiny. It just
Yeah.
is.
I totally agree. I totally agree.
So it's been a weird month. I mean, we've had some pretty good mix of single player, or I've had mix of single player, indie, AAA, and also multiplayer games. So it's
Yeah.
been a grab bag kind of for me. We'll see what May entails. I had another one I was going to add in here, but I decided we're already far enough into May. I need to save it for May,
Just
just in
save. Yeah.
case.
Save it for May.
Yeah, yeah, we've got an hour and a half plus here, so um, that's everything though. Yeah,
Yeah. That's it.
what a month! What a month April was. We've had a joy. It's been a joyous occasion discussing April and May with y'all,
Yeah.
and thanks for joining us. We will see you in June about May.